Greetings everyone, Melderon here and welcome to the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 2. This guide has been in works since the beta was launched, and I couldn't have done it without the immense amount of help that I received from the Shaman Discord, particularly Ace, Ale, TMB, ATH, and other friends of the channel including Pogren, Discipulo, and Meiji. Thank you all so much for providing the help in getting this guide done. I wouldn't be able to do it if it wasn't for everyone testing things and submitting video footage, so thank you all very much. And again, thanks again to the Shaman Discord. This video serves as a supplement to the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1, where I go over updates and confirmations from the Classic WoW beta for things like spell coefficients, spell, talent, and stat mechanics, weapon buffs, and a lot more. As with all of my guides, this will be available on ClassicWoW.live, and in a pinned comment below and in the description, you'll find a link to Google Slides if you want to go through the slide at your own pace, and timestamps so you can navigate this guide more efficiently. With that, let's get started. So again, this is part of a greater story. I would first check out the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 and my Totem Guide, which is available on ClassicWoW.live or my channel, to get a basis for this guide, right? So most of the information from the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1 is still relevant and valid for things like stats, racials, most of the spell coefficients, most of the mechanics, spell and imbue details, and totems. However, there are some idiosyncrasies and confirmations that we're going to be going over in this guide to supplement Part 1, because there are some core differences between Classic WoW and private server vanilla WoW. So now let's go over what we're going to be talking about in this guide. We're going to be doing spell coefficients, we're going to be talking about internal spell scaling, which is something pretty interesting and at least new to most people. We're going to be going over our statistics course and weapon buffs again. We're going to be looking at differences in totem mechanics, talent, spell, and stat mechanics, glancing penalty, which I did not cover in Part 1, leveling and the new dungeon meta in Classic WoW, some changes to Ghost Wolf form, some known issues that have occurred in the beta and have not been rectified as of yet, and finally things that still require some testing. So before we get into spell coefficients in general, let's go over some basics. Now, if you don't know a lot about spell coefficients, remember not all of your spell power goes to your spells. In fact, spells interact with your available spell power through what we call spell coefficients. Here are two very easy examples. For a normal hard cast spell, you divide the cast time by the reference, which is 3.5, to get the spell coefficient. For instant casts, they are considered 1.5 second spells. You do 1.5 divided by 3.5. That's a crash course. That's not how all things are calculated. Spell coefficients have some weird, wonky idiosyncrasies that you need to know if you want to actually calculate them. There is a guide that Osgar and I have worked on together and a tool that we've created for downranking. I would check out the downranking guide and tool video on ClassicWoW.live, and there's also a written guide there as well. There's the video on my channel, and then there's a downranking calculator, which can be found at wowdownrank.com, and that was developed by Osgar. There's also a pre-level 20 penalty, so anything you learn before level 20 will be penalized when downranking. Also, it's good to know that some talents can affect spell coefficients while others do not, and we'll go over that as we go through each spell. So how did I test these spell coefficients? I tested them with every shaman spell, totem, and imbue with as many talents as possible. I did multiple replicates per spell, 15 to 30 reps depending on the spell. I did every available rank. Again, the beta was only up to level 40, so I was only able to do spells 40 and below. I accrued as much spell power as possible, and I compared with theory from the Theorycraft add-on and from what I've found out from private servers. So this is a comparison between what was known back in vanilla, at least what was calculated back then, what was calculated on private servers. The point that needs to be made is that the beta itself is not like a private server. I can't spawn items in order to get the most spell power possible or the best items possible, so I was able to really only work with what I had. So I want to thank anyone who's listening to this from the beta PvE realm. People were very kind and friendly in either donating pieces of gear so I can get the right spell power or helping me obtain pieces of gear. So thank you very much for anyone who's helped me on the PvE beta server. A link to the spell coefficient spreadsheet that I created to calculate these coefficients is available in the description. Let's first go over the frost spells and the frost imbue, Frostbrand weapon. Now for Frost Shock, I tested rank 1 and rank 2. The theoretical coefficient is 40.71%. That's the cast time 1.5, or it's an instant cast divided by 3.5, but there's a 5% penalty because it has a slow effect. And my tested coefficients are well within range of both private servers and the theoretical coefficient from the Theorycraft add-on. Notice that concussion does not alter the spell coefficient for Frost Shock. It'll increase the base damage, but not the spell coefficient. Now for Frostbrand weapon. On private servers, I got 25% spell coefficient. Now, from the vanilla Theorycraft add-on, it only should be 10%, and that's what I got. So it corroborates with the original vanilla. The private server that I tested was much higher, so that's something that's going to be a little bit different. Also notice that elemental weapons increases the spell coefficient of Frostburn weapon by 0.5% per rank. So if you have elemental weapons, you can get more out of your spell power for a Frostbrand weapon. Now for Flame Shock, which is unique because it's a hybrid spell, meaning that it has an initial portion and a periodic portion. Now in private servers, I got approximately 15% for anything above level 20 for initial, and 13% for periodic. The Theorycraft add-on and the private server actually corroborate there. However, what I've gotten on the Classic WoW Beta is much different. Pre-level 20, of course, there is a penalty. However, by rank 3, you can see that the initial portion is about 21%, and the periodic is only 10%. So on the beta, compared to Theorycraft add-on, the initial is higher, but the periodic is lower. Will that balance out? I'm not entirely sure, but as with Frost Shock, concussion does not alter the spell coefficient. Now let's take a look at the fire totems. There are 3 fire totems: Searing Totem, Magma Totem, and Fire Nova. We'll go to Searing first. On the Theorycraft add-on and on private servers, you get about 8%. However, on the beta, it's closer to 10%, so it's about a 2% increase. Notice that Call of Flame does not increase the spell coefficient for Searing Totem. For Magma Totem, we're supposed to get around 3.2% per tick. I got a little bit higher than that, closer to 4%. So it's close, that's why it's in yellow. It's within the margin of error. It may be a little bit higher on beta. Again, Call of Flame does not affect the Magma Totem spell coefficient. Now, Fire Nova Totem is very interesting. We're supposed to get about 15% for anything above level 20. We're getting less than that on the beta, around 12%. However, Call of Flame seems to affect the spell coefficient for Fire Nova Totem, increasing it, but not affecting the other fire totems. This is very interesting. I'm not sure if this is a bug, but definitely something to check out when Classic WoW launches. See if you can corroborate this same thing. Now moving on to Flame Tongue coefficient. This is very, very similar to Frostbrand weapon. We were supposed to get around 15% from private servers. Again, Theorycraft add-on corroborates the Classic WoW beta with around 10%. And just as within Frostbrand, elemental weapons increases the spell coefficient by 0.5% per rank, up to a total of 11.5-ish% theoretical maximum. So again, if you want to get more out of Flame Tongue weapon, more out of the coefficient, if you have a lot of spell power, elemental weapons will not only increase its damage, but will increase the spell coefficient as well. Now let's move on to the nature spells. Lightning Bolt. Now, Lightning Bolt is a 3-second cast without talents, so we're supposed to get 85.71% of anything above level 20, and that's exactly what we get. We are within the margin of error. Private server, theoretical coefficient, Classic WoW beta, everything corroborates. Now, concussion, as with the shocks, concussion does not affect the spell coefficient. However, Storm Strike definitely does. So this is a kind of a weird result. As you know, Storm Strike will increase the damage dealt by your next 2 nature spells by 20%, but it seems to have a really big effect on the spell coefficient, increasing it to 120%. So this is kind of interesting. It's a 20% increase in damage, but the actual difference in spell coefficient is closer to 40%. So this is a really interesting result. This could be really cool when you're thinking about how to theorycraft like enhancement elemental combinations and raids, like the enhancement Storm Strikes and then the elemental shaman kind of works on top of that synergistically. It's kind of memey, it's kind of min-maxy, but just really interesting thing to keep in mind. A very similar thing exists when we look at Chain Lightning. Now we're supposed to get around 71.43%, which is exactly what we get on private servers and what we tested in the Classic WoW beta. Same thing with Concussion, it does not affect the spell coefficient. However, Storm Strike does increase the spell coefficient for Chain Lightning, not as much as it did for Lightning Bolt, but still it is an increase. Now for Lightning Shield. For a very long time, it's been thought that each orb receives 33% of your spell power, leading up to 100% spell coefficient for all 3 discharges. However, the Classic WoW beta has shown that it's lower. It's actually around 27% per orb. But interestingly, with Storm Strike, you get up to the theoretical 33%. So it makes me think maybe somewhere way back in the day, someone tested this with Storm Strike buff. I don't know if that's true, but it may have carried over until now. So we're at 27% normally. With Storm Strike, you're about 32.43%, close to 33%. Now with Improved Lightning Shield, does not affect the spell coefficient. I also tested it with Storm Strike and Improved Lightning Shield to see if there's any kind of weird synergistic relationship, and there's not. It's still around 33%. Now moving on to Earth Shock. Earth Shock is very similar to Frost Shock. It is an instant cast, so it's 1.5 divided by 3.5 to get the spell coefficient, but like Frost Shock, it has an additional effect. It has a silence, so it actually loses 5% as a penalty. So that should be around 40%. Now, interestingly, the private server test I did was around 45%. 5%, so what it would be if it wasn't penalized, so maybe that was an error in the coding, but Theorycraft add-on calls for 40%, and that's what we get in the Classic WoW beta. As with the other spells, Concussion does not affect the spell coefficient, but interestingly, unlike the lightning spells, Earthshock doesn't receive a Storm Strike bonus to its coefficient. It's still approximately 40%. It's about a percent higher, but that could be due to sampling error. I don't think that's enough to really make a call, so 40% it is for Earthshock. Now moving on to the healing spells. Let's do Healing Wave first. Healing Wave is a 3-second cast. Theoretically should receive 85.71%. It corroborates all the way through. Actually, all the healing spells, there really is not much to cover here, but one thing important to cover is that Purification does not affect spell coefficient. It increases the effectiveness of your heal, but does not increase the spell coefficient. So Healing Wave gets what we thought it would, as does Lesser Healing Wave and Chain Heal. Lesser Healing Wave should receive 42.86%, and we're well within that range, and Chain Heal should receive 71.43%, and again, we see that as well. Purification also does not affect the spell coefficients of either of these spells. Last but not least, we have Healing Stream Totem. Healing Stream Totem should receive about 2.16% per tick, and we get very, very close to that, 2.37 to 2.11%. Again, Purification does not affect this totem spell coefficient. Alright, let's talk about internal spell scaling. This is a very interesting thing. So what I'm talking about here is scaling within ranks, not across ranks. So as you level, as your character levels, the effectiveness of your spells increases. It's almost like mini ranks. Now this affects Lightning Bolt, Chain Lightning, Weapon Imbues, Healing Spells, and possibly even Shocks. We didn't get a chance to test everything, but I do have a spreadsheet. The link is in the description so you can see what I'm talking about. This internal scaling occurs up until you receive the next rank. So for example, let's say rank 1 Earthshock, it'll keep accruing additional min and max damage range until you are at the level where you will receive Earthshock rank 2, and then it'll stop scaling. So this is an interesting thing. It keeps your spells more relevant as you level, and it really limits that stepwise nature that ranking has. What's really interesting is that I do not remember seeing this in tooltips in Vanilla WoW. I did not play Shaman though. This could have definitely happened and I just missed it. But in Classic WoW, in the beta, you'll see it right in the tooltip. You'll see the numbers changing each level. Now what's really interesting is that Pogren went back to our PTR based on a certain private server, and he was able to determine that internal spell scaling was also occurring, but it wasn't overtly showing them tooltips. So this is something that is likely core to Vanilla WoW. Private servers also coded it properly, but the only big difference is now we're seeing the changes. Definitely as you're leveling, just hover over your spells and look at the differences, and you'll see them actually increasing as you level. And this kind of plays into why weapon imbues are balanced, because you would think if I train my newest Flame Tongue at level 18, let's say, and then I got a Rock Biter at level 20, well, the Rock Biter has to be better, right? Because I learned it at a higher level. Well, this internal spell scaling would say that they keep them comparable at a much finer scale. So I think this internal spell scaling is a way to normalize things like weapon imbues and stuff like that. But I don't think this is just Shaman. I remember people talking about this on Paladins as well. I don't think this is just a Shaman thing. I would definitely look into this in your class as well, especially if they're a mana using class, and see if this is also occurring on your tooltips. Okay, it's now time for my favorite part of the guide, testing the weapon imbues. Now, if you remember from Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1, I did some ANOVAs, which analyzes the variance between weapon imbues, and I showed that it really doesn't matter, right? DPS is very well normalized across these different weapon imbues and across weapon speeds. So I wanted to test this again on the Classic WoW Beta, obviously, because it's a different system, and it might have some core differences. So I did 10 replicates per weapon speed per imbue, and I tested across 9 weapon speeds. Now, I just want to say that I did all of the weapon speed in the first Advanced Shaman Guide because I was using a PTR and I was able to spawn weapons by key command. You can't do that on the beta. So what I did was I scoured the world, checked the auction house, checked guildies, got as many weapons as I could possibly get, and I was able to get across 9 weapon speeds. And I tested it with Flurry because I did not test with Flurry in Advanced Shaman Guide 1, and Flurry could have some important synergistic effects with Wind Fury, so I wanted to make sure I test that as well. And what I did was I put on my gear, white-hitted the enemy, and recorded the DPS. And the enemy I chose was the Sawtooth Crocolisk. They're level 38, 39. I was level 40. Their armor value produces 31.2 to 32.7 physical damage reduction, which is pretty average. It's more of a leather mail wearing is just kind of what we're going to do. And the reason I picked something in the middle is because I didn't want to over-represent physical versus magical weapon imbues. The magical weapon imbues do much better on higher armor targets, and the physical weapon imbues like Rockbiter, Wind Fury do much better on the lower armor targets. So I want to make sure I got in the middle. And I verified this with Beast Lord. Discipula was nice enough to go in there with his Hunter and verify these armor values. So there is a spreadsheet to show you the tests that I did and all of the math and what I was wearing and my talents and everything. So if you want to click on that spreadsheet, the link will be in the description. So let's get into what I found. First, let's look across all weapon speeds. So this is all DPS per weapon imbue averaged across all weapon speeds. So when you do that, there is no significant difference in DPS between imbues. To go over what this is a box plot. If you don't know how to read a box plot, there is a picture in the previous slide to show you what they are. But essentially, this is the spread of the data, and each color represents one of the imbues. So as you can see, there are 4 A's on top, and what those letters mean is that if a box plot shares a letter with another box plot, they are not different from each other statistically, okay? I'm using a Nova and an alpha value of 0.05 as a cutoff for my statistical significance. So there is no difference when you look across weapon speeds. But what if we look within weapon speeds? The next slide shows that. Green line is Rockbiter, blue is Frostbrand, the orange-red is Flametongue, and the purple is Wind Fury. Across the x-axis are the 9 weapon speeds I tested, going from 1.4 to 3.8, and DPS is on the y-axis. Don't look at the increase from 1.4 to 3.8. That's due to the weapon's DPS. What you're really interested in is comparing the 4 weapon imbues within the dotted lines. Now, what you'll probably immediately notice is that Rockbiter consistently had the highest average DPS. However, Wind Fury's effectiveness scales with weapon speed. The slower the weapon was, the closer Wind Fury became to the top weapon imbue and closer to Rockbiter. This is very important to realize because I did not see this on private servers. And there could be a lot of credence to the idea that the slower the weapon, the more impactful Wind Fury could be because of the huge variance in attack damage that can occur with Wind Fury weapon procs. Remember, the slower the weapon speed, the higher the top end. So if you are Wind Fury procking, the ability to do a lot of damage occurs with slower weapons with Wind Fury. Another thing you'll notice is that Flametongue weapon consistently does not do well. It doesn't scale with weapon speed at all. Faster weapon speed does not mean it's a better thing to use. Classically, a lot of people have thought that Flametongue scales great with faster weapons, and that just isn't the case. It's being outperformed in almost every scenario. Frostbrand to me is a much better magical thing to use, and we'll get into that as we go into each weapon speed, but just the take-home messages that I've seen so far from that. So just have a look at this graph, see what is happening. We're going to go over 9 more slides with each weapon speed, but this kind of is a summary slide, okay? So if we go to 1.4 seconds, this is what it looks like. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, and you can stop and look at them if you want at your own pace, but remember, if a box shares a letter with another box, like Flametongue, Frostbrand, and Wind Fury all have a B above them, that means they aren't different from each other statistically. However, Rockbiter has an A, meaning that it is different from the all other 3. Another way to say that is Rockbiter is statistically significantly higher in DPS than the other 3 weapon imbues at 1.4 second speed. We move to 1.6 seconds, things even out a little bit. Rockbiter is higher than Wind Fury, but Flametongue and Frostbrand are not different from either Rockbiter or Wind Fury. At 1.9 seconds, Rockbiter again is number 1. At 2.3 seconds, Rockbiter again is number 1. At 2.7 seconds, Rockbiter is the highest, but it's not significantly different from Frostbrand, but it is different from Flametongue and Wind Fury. At 2.9 seconds, Rockbiter and Wind Fury are top. They're not different from Frostbrand, but they are significantly higher than Flametongue. At 3.3 seconds, Rockbiter and Wind Fury again are number 1. Very similar scenario to the 2.9 seconds. At 3.5 seconds, Rockbiter is number 1, followed by Frostbrand and Wind Fury, followed by Flametongue. And finally, at the slowest weapon speed, Rockbiter is number 1, followed by Wind Fury and Frostbrand. So as you can see, Rockbiter is consistently the highest DPS, highest average DPS across all the weapon speeds I tested. Wind Fury is probably the second highest, followed by Frostbrand, and Flametongue is pretty much left in the dust. You may be considering, is it even worth training Flame Tongue? And honestly, looking at these results, guys, I really don't think it's worth it. If you're worried about magical imbues, if you need a magical imbue for a really high armor target, use Frostbrand. I mean, you won't get it to level 20, but if you can save money while leveling, do it. And these are pretty interesting differences from private servers. On private servers, I tested every single weapon speed, and there were no significant differences between weapon imbues. None, not a one. In the beta, there are clear differences between weapon imbues, with Rockbiter being the top, followed by Wind Fury. So, the slower the weapon speed, the more impact you're going to get out of Wind Fury, the more potential impact you're going to get out of Wind Fury. But again, if you value that consistency, Rockbiter is going to be your best bet. And this wasn't due to scaling or when I acquired these weapon imbues. I got the most recent Rockbiter level 34, I got Wind Fury at level 40, I got Flame Tongue at 36, and I got Frostbrand at 38. There was no correlation between when I learned them and the DPS output, mostly because of internal spell scaling. Remember, these are all being scaled internally, so they all should be at a consistent level. Again, what do you value? Do you value time of engagement? Do you value consistency? Do you value having the ability to one-hit someone? Slow consistency, Rockbiter. If you really want burst DPS, Wind Fury, and if you need a magical imbue for some reason, go with Frostbrand. That's my recommendation from the statistics and from the data that I gathered on the Classic WoW beta. Now let's cover totem mechanics. There are some core differences between private servers and the Classic WoW beta concerning totem mechanics, so let's go over one by one. First, Earthbind cutting is not as effective due to quote-unquote leeway. Now if you don't know what leeway is, I would definitely go to Perplexity's channel. He has a really interesting video that goes over how leeway works, but essentially the melee ranges of both players and NPCs is a lot greater on the Classic WoW beta compared to private servers. Because of this, it's really hard to get out of a mob's range. You can still do Earthbind kiting, however the damage reduction is not as high as it was on the private servers. Just something to keep in mind. Another really interesting point is the Stoneclaw Totem is much more robust compared to private servers. It seems a lot more tanky, and its taunt seems a lot more reliable. If you are in a situation where you need to kill more than one mob, definitely use Stoneclaw Totem to get other mobs' attention and whittle one down first. Another really interesting thing is that totems can be cleaved. Now originally in the Classic WoW beta, all AoE effects killed totems, and that was hard to deal with, but that was fixed. However, cleaves do kill totems. So say you're fighting a warrior, for some reason he cleaves you. If you're standing near a totem, the cleave will hit the totem as well and kill it. So it's something to keep in mind. There are some NPCs that also cleave, so if you are dealing with an NPC that cleaves, just know that your totems are going to get cleaved as well. The next thing is that friendly totems and searing totem, their ranges aren't immediately on-off. And what I mean by that is you're probably used to putting a totem down, you go to some distance, it falls off, and you close that distance again, immediately comes back on, the buff comes back on. That isn't occurring. What's happening is you leave a totem at some range. In order to get back into the totem's range, you have to get much closer to it than you normally should. And this could be due to batching and server pinging. We're not really sure what the mechanic is, but it is noticeable. And you can notice it with friendly totems, and you'll also notice it with searing totem. A mob has to get really close to searing totem for it to start activating. It's something that I've noticed, and it's something that is kind of interesting and also annoying sometimes, so just keep that in mind. Number 5, totem twisting is working great. So we were able to test this with Flame Tongue Totem and Frost Resistance Totem. You put Flame Tongue down, you replace Flame Tongue with Frost Resistance, and you have the Frost Resistance buff, and you still have Flame Tongue in your weapon. So that's working great, which means it'll work fine for Wind Fury and Grace of Air. So that's really good news for Enhancement Shaman and Shaman that are going to be totem twisting in raids. The next thing is that totems produce considerable amounts of threat. If you go to fight a mob and you drop down like a Magma Totem or a Searing Totem or a Fire Nova Totem, if you are attacking more than one mob and you don't have aggro on the second mob and you drop a totem, they will immediately attack the totem and kill it. It's kind of annoying when you're trying to scoop up mobs and you're trying to AoE farm or you're trying to use Fire Nova. You have to hit each mob and then drop your totem and then it'll go off because they produce a certain amount of threat and the mobs will attack them as soon as you put them down. Another weird thing is that totems can be healed, and I don't mean, okay, everyone knows you can target a totem, but I don't remember being able to heal totems. And as you see in the video clip, I'm chain healing and the chain heal is bouncing to the totem. I hope this doesn't occur in raids. I mean, it shouldn't, because chain heal should be in its 1.12 state where it's a smart heal, so it shouldn't jump to something that has full health. But totems have less health than players, so I'm hoping this doesn't happen and screw up in raids, but something to keep in mind. The next thing is that debuffs are removed immediately upon putting a totem down. In private servers, it was kind of wonky where you would place the totem down and it wouldn't pulse right away and you wouldn't get rid of your debuff. Well, in this video, you see poison cleansing. When I drop it down, it immediately wipes the poison. I've also heard that Tremor does the same thing with Fear, Sleep, and Charm, so that's great as well. So just totems seem to be working immediately as soon as you place them down. Non-fire totems become an enemies if you're mind controlled. In this clip, you'll see that the priest is mind controlling the shaman, and those totems become the priest's minions, if you will. So something to keep in mind when you're dueling priests or fighting people that have mind control capability. Another interesting thing is that enemy NPCs that are shaman-like NPCs, like Quillbore, let's say, their totems persist after you kill them. Now, this isn't really a shaman totem thing, but I thought it was interesting to add in here. So you kill a Quillbore, and it's a shaman-type Quillbore, the totems that it put down will still be there after you kill it. Stoneclaw totem does not remove stealth even when the target is hit by the taunt. So in private servers, this did work. It was like a 0 hit attack or something, and it would take rogues out of stealth and druids out of stealth. This is not working on the beta. However, Magma Totem and Fire Nova can take players out of stealth. Next is that Searing Totem and likely all fire totems follow the spell hit table and are subject to partial resistances. So even though totems aren't considered spells when it comes to certain abilities and certain talents, they are considered spells when it goes to their hits. So a Searing Totem Fireball can be partially resisted if that mob or player has some fire resistance. The last thing is that cast sequence macros allow you to drop your totems in a sequence. You can set up a cast sequence macro, say drop these 4 totems, and you hit that macro and it will put the 4 totems down, or however many totems you put in the cast sequence macro. Moving on to talents, spell, and stat mechanics. First one, clear casting or elemental focus occurs when the cast time is complete, not when the spell hits the target. So if you're casting Lightning Bolt, as soon as that Lightning Bolt cast is complete, you'll see the clear casting proc. This is actually better because then you can time when you want to use your Chain Lightning. So it'll be sooner, might increase DPS considering that you'll know the clear casting is procced sooner. Next is that clear casting or elemental focus does not interrupt your natural MP5 regen. So if you proc clear casting and you cast a spell, it won't interfere with your mana regen. Also very important. Flame Tongue and Frostbrand weapon and Fire Totem crits do not proc elemental devastation. I kind of talked about this in the previous slide. Totems are not considered spells, but they are on the spell hit table, so they do not proc elemental devastation. So if you get a crit with a Flame Tongue weapon proc or a Fire Totem, you will not gain that effect. Next is that Lightning Shield will discharge if you're sapped. So this is kind of interesting considering that some rogues are going to go into the talent that they can sap and remain in stealth. Well, you could get those rogues out of stealth if you have Lightning Shield on. Keep that in mind. Wind Fury extra attacks does not consume flurry procs. This is good, but there's an asterisk here, and we'll talk about that in a second. In most circumstances, if you have flurry up and you Wind Fury, the extra attacks will not consume flurry procs. So that's good. That's what we've seen in the past. We know that from Unbreakable's video, so this is excellent news. Also, extra attack critical strikes proc flurry. So extra attacks do not consume flurry, but their crits will cause flurry to proc or refresh. The next big piece of news of Wind Fury is that there is no internal cooldown, and there shouldn't be. There was never one in vanilla. The internal cooldown started in Burning Crusade. There was a change that Wind Fury could not proc off itself in vanilla. That can happen, but there is no internal cooldown. You can Wind Fury every auto attack with your main hand. Elemental Fury grants 2-time crit multiplier to Flame Tongue and Frostbrand. If you have Elemental Fury and you crit with either Flame Tongue or Frostbrand weapon, that crit will be a 100% crit bonus. For trolls, Berserking requires 40% HP or less to get the max 30% haste increase. So if you are a troll and you want to get that, you're going to have to get to at least 40% health to get the maximum Berserking effect. Sit procking does not work. However, it can be forced with a little bit of ingenuity thanks to batching. In this video, you'll see that the player is moving forward and sitting, and this could be a way to proc effects that are needed for you to be crit. This video is using a warrior, but as you know, Shaman have Eye of the Storm, which allows you to get no pushback on casts if you're a victim of a critical strike. This could be a way to force that proc. Shaman will regen 12.5 mana per tick at level 1, and this rate will increase by 0.5 mana per 5 every level. So just keep that in mind. Whenever you gain a level, you get another 0.5 MP5 base. Weapon skills increase much slower in Classic WoW compared to private servers. When you're leveling as a shaman, I highly recommend switching if you're using a one-hander and a shield sometimes and a two-hander other times. If you're switching weapons back and forth, I highly recommend swapping weapons sometimes, making sure your weapon skills stay up and you use intellect buffs or gear here to make this more efficient. It takes a lot more time to get weapon skills in Classic WoW. Completing a spell cast puts you into combat. So if you're casting Lightning Bolt, as soon as that cast is complete, you will be flagged for combat, not when the projectile hits the target. This is a core difference from private servers, so just keep that in mind. Last, Wind Fury procs and hard casts reset your swing timer, but shocks and buffing, like Lightning Shield, does not. If you are hard casting a Lightning Bolt, that will reset your swing timer. If you gain a Wind Fury proc, that will also reset your swing timer. So in order to maximize DPS, let's say you're fishing for Wind Fury with Storm Strike, you want to use Storm Strike immediately after you auto attack so that you minimize the amount of time wasted, quote unquote, from the swing timer reset. If you're any warriors watching this or rogues, keep that in mind as well. If you're fishing for Wind Fury procs, do it after you auto attack. Now let's move into something else with talents. Talents act multiplicatively. So the question we had was, Osgar and I, for development of the downranking tool, does Healing Way and Purification, do they act additively or multiplicatively? As you know, Healing Wave with 3 stacks increases the effectiveness of Healing Wave by 18%, and Purification increases effectiveness of all heals by 10%. So is it 10 plus 18, or is it 10 times 18? We used Healing Wave at rank 7 to test this. Healing Wave rank 7 average heal is 797 health. If it's additive, it's 797 plus 797 times 0.1 plus 797 times 0.18, which will give a total of 1020.16. However, if it's multiplicative, it'd be 797 times 1.1 times 1.18 for a total of 1034.51. Doesn't seem like a huge difference, but we wanted to know this so we can calculate proper spell scaling with talents. So after doing a lot of tests, we actually determined that it is multiplicative. So there is a link to the spreadsheet in the description if you want to see the math yourself, but we tested this to make sure. I don't know if this is the same for every class, but what we can say with confidence is this is how it works with Shaman for Healing Wave and Purification. So if you're another healing class or another spell damage class, I'm not saying this is something you could take as gospel, but it's something that you could test and something you can also check out if you're interested. Now let's move on to glancing penalty. You may or may not know that when you're fighting a mob higher level than you, and we're going to use a mob 3 levels higher than you for this example, you have a 40% chance to glance or deal less damage. Now that chance drops the smaller the difference in level between you and the target you're fighting. But we use 3 levels here because the bosses are 3 levels higher than you. This is the most relevant reason why we need to know glancing penalties. This only comes to effect when you're meleeing. So this is for like an enhancement shaman, which isn't a popular endgame build for shaman. But we've also tested this in warriors and druids, in all forms in druids as well. And what we found is that the reduction in damage, or the percent decrease in melee damage, is 35% if it max weapon skill. We've seen numbers thrown out 30%, 40%. I think the math wasn't done properly. The correct formula is below. What you have to do is take the absolute value of the difference between non-glancing average and glancing average, divide that by non-glancing average and times 100. That's a percent decrease calculation. So we found there's a 35% reduction in melee damage in warriors, druids, and shaman. That corroborates in private servers and on the beta. It's the same number. We didn't test pure caster. We didn't have enough time. We wanted to test priests and see if there was a different penalty for pure caster classes. We did not get a chance to do that. Another thing we found is that it seems like the reduction seems to shift non-linearly, which means that a point reduction and a point increase don't translate very well. So, for example, I also tested this with 1 point below max weapon skill on my shaman, and it was a 40% glancing penalty. So just that 1 point gets you a 5% decrease in the decrease or reduction. We also tested this with orc with axes. Since orcs have axe specialization, they get a 5-point increase to their weapon skill. And this decreased the penalty to 16.3%. That's an average of 3.3% reduction per point. Now, the reason why I think it's non-linear is because if it was 3.3%, then the 1 point lower test should have been 38.3% instead of 40%. This tells me that the scaling of glancing penalty is non-linear. This requires a lot more testing. There is a spreadsheet, the link will be in the description if you want to see the tests we did. We did them both on private servers and we did them on Classic WoW Beta. But the most important thing is that if you're at max weapon skill and you're fighting a boss, you're going to be seeing a 40% chance to get a 35% reduction in melee damage unless you increase your weapon skills with either racials or gear, and that could minimize your DPS loss. Time to talk about a subject that I really like to talk about, leveling and dungeons. What I can say with confidence is that dungeons are far easier on Classic compared to private servers. This is likely due to mob damage being lower, so you need to heal less and drink less, and I also believe that party DPS is higher. Now, due to this, and this has been talked about a lot, you can generate a lot of XP per hour that even rivals optimal grinding and questing in the open world. I would try to do dungeons as much as possible, one because they're fun, two because you're going to get a good amount of XP and they have great quest reward. Get all the relevant quests, do dungeons whenever possible, and really try to enjoy them, and this could be a really viable way of getting some XP. And you may even want to consider getting into a 5-man group prior. Use ClassicWoW.live, use Discord or whatever to find groups, like look for leveling groups, get another 4 people and do like a dungeon leveling crew. And the next thing I want to say is that myself, Defcamp, Sea-Doo, there's been a lot of people shaman tanking. It is extremely viable. It's extremely easy. Your threat generation is incredible. Your survivability is really good. I was able to heal a shaman tank wielding a 2-hander, like no problem. Sea-Doo and Defcamp and myself all shaman tanked in the beta. It's very, very viable. And you know, I know a lot of people scoff at it, but it's like dungeons are at the point where you can blow through a lot of them. And I healed tanks all the way up to Scarlet Monastery Armory, shaman tanks, and it was really fine. Just want to give anyone who's thinking about shaman tanking, like, it's never been easier. Just give you guys a heads up. There's an advanced shaman guide on my channel and on ClassicWoW.live if you want to learn more about shaman tanking. There's a huge leveling portion in the back that I did. At the end of that guide, if you're interested, I would definitely check that out. Now let's go into differences in Ghost Wolf. If you remember Advanced Shaman Guide Part 1, towards the end of the video I did Ghost Wolf, what you can and what you can't do in Ghost Wolf. Well, things have shifted a little bit in the ClassicWoW beta compared to private servers. What you can do is benefit from Rockbiter. There is no attack power penalty. You get the same amount of attack power you would normally. You can put Rockbiter on and you can hit people just as hard as you would if you were Rockbiter in human form. You can proc flurry, you can swap your gear, you can skin and herb, you can block, dodge, and parry, and you, for some reason, you can make bandages. Haven't figured out why, but you can do that. These are some things you can do in Ghost Wolf form. Now let's go over what you can't. What's interesting is you cannot benefit from Wind Fury, Frostbrand, or Flame Tongue. So the only weapon imbue that works in Ghost Wolf is Rockbiter. I think this is due to the fact that Rockbiter is an internal attack power buff. You see it in your gear sheet. When you open up your character sheet, you see the attack power bonus. Wind Fury, Frostband, and Flame Tongue are more like auras or something, and they don't work like Rockbiter does at a fundamental level, and that's why Rockbiter works. So definitely keep that in mind. You cannot communicate in Ghost Wolf. You can't talk to Flight Masters, you can't go to auction, you can't talk to bankers, you can't take or turn in quests, etc. So you can't talk to anyone if you're in Ghost Wolf form. You also cannot use any other abilities except just your auto attack. You cannot use potions or consumables, and you can't make anything else except for bandages. This could be a bug. Let me know if you guys also see this when Classic WoW launches. I wasn't able to leatherwork, so you can't make anything with bandages for some reason. Now let's go over some known issues, things that are still kind of not working properly in my opinion. One is that Wind Fury procs do not apply Flurry if an extra attack is an overkill. So what I mean by that is like you attack a target, you proc Wind Fury, the first attack kills the target, a subsequent attack crits, you see it crit, but the mob is already dead. You do not get Flurry. I don't know if this is a bug or not. It seems weird to me because you got Wind Fury and you critted, so you should have gotten Flurry. But I don't see it occurring. I'm not 100% sure if this is correct. Next is that if you crit on an extra attack while Wind Fury is proccing, a Flurry stack is removed. In other words, if you don't have Flurry and you run up to a target, you auto attack it. That first auto attack procs Wind Fury and causes 2 additional attacks to come off. If one of those crits, it automatically removes a stack of Flurry. Only happens if it crits. So this is kind of weird. It's kind of wonky. I've submitted all of these things as bugs. I don't think this is correct because, you know, going back to our videos in the past of Unbreakable and stuff like that, no extra attack should consume a Flurry proc, and it doesn't do it if it doesn't crit. It only does it if it crits. The next is that leeway affects both spells and melee attacks. This might not be an issue at all, but it's something that I thought would be interesting to talk about. So in the clip here, you see Ale and his NA moving back and forth, and you can see that the Earth Shock range indicator is turning white when he's moving back and forth. So there is leeway even with spells. This is an interesting thing. So Perplexity's video is linked in the description. Check that out for melee leeway, but this video is about spell leeway. The next one is that Grounding Totem soaks 5 spells currently instead of 1. This clip is from from vanilla, and you can see that the shaman places the totem down when the projectile is coming out. The projectile destroys the totem immediately. Grounding totem should only soak 1, not 5. I know this is being rectified. I think this was commented somewhere, so I know this is an issue. I can guarantee you that it's a bug because of this old footage. The next is that Farsight sometimes doesn't load NPCs and players, only textures. Now this also occurred on private servers, so I don't know if this is correct, but it would seem to me, what's the point of using Farsight if you can't see enemies or players, right? That's the whole point of Farsight and Eagle Eye and stuff like that. This also might be an issue as well. Finally, let's go over things that still need testing. Thank you Ace in the Shaman Discord for compiling this list. For talents, we need to know, does Totemic Mastery increase 30-yard totems to 40 yards? As in private servers, Tremor Totem already has a 30-yard range. So Totemic Mastery in its tooltip says it increases all friendly totems to 30 yards. But since Tremor already is 30 yards, on private servers it actually increases it 10 more to 40. Does this happen in Classic? Does Ancestral Knowledge, the +5 intellect, is that base intellect or is that all intellect? Something we have to test as well. For totems, will Mana Tide, if there are 2 shaman in a group, override another shaman's Mana Spring totem? Can Wind Fury and Flame Tongue totem affect multiple parties if you cycle the totem in and out of those parties? As you know, Wind Fury has a buff. If you remove Wind Fury, that buff still ticks down. That's how totem twisting works. Well, can you shaman twist? Basically what this question is. Will Arcane Missiles be cancelled by Grounding Totem? Arcane Missiles is a channeled spell that has individual packets of damage that come out. Similar to Mind Flay, but Mind Flay is one solid stream. So if you place Grounding Totem down, will it destroy one of the Arcane Missiles, and then will the other missiles hit you, or it will completely negate that effect? Similar to Mind Flay as well, I guess. Next, will Grounding Totem absorb an Imp Fireball or a Searing Totem Fireball? Let's say you see that a Warlock is charging up a Shadow Bolt, and you want to ground that, but the Imp is going to put out a Fireball before that. Will the Totem take in the Shadow Bolt, or will it take in the Fireball? That's a good question, and we're not sure about that one yet. The next is, can Grounding Totem negate blind? And there are a lot of things we don't know about Grounding Totem, so this is actually a catch-all. What will Grounding Totem ground and what will it not ground? Next is spell power scaling. Do the red whelp gloves scale with spell power? This item could be really good for enhancement, so we need to know if it will scale if we have extra spell power. Can Wind Fury extra attacks proc chance on hit effects of weapons? So say a weapon says, oh, it has a chance of causing additional fire damage. Will Wind Fury extra attacks be able to cause that proc to actually occur? The next is, do several Storm Strike buffs stack? So as you know, Storm Strike has a buff that increases damage for your next 2 nature spells by 20%. If 2 Shaman Storm Strike, does that buff stack? For Ghost Wolf, are you immune to Sap, Seduce, Mind Control in Ghost Wolf? Can you be hibernated or Scare Beast in Ghost Wolf? And what items can you use in Ghost Wolf? I said you couldn't use potions or consumables, but in private servers you're able to use some engineering pieces and on-use items. So are you able to use those in Ghost Wolf? And finally, for engineering, does World Enlarger's buff go away after giving or taking damage? Does a Gnomish Battle Chicken have good stealth detection? What way is Gnomish Death Ray scaling? Physical or with spell power? And finally, if Gnomish Death Ray is interrupted, does it go into cooldown? A lot of questions we don't know. There's still a lot of testing we need to do in Classic WoW. If you're willing to help, hit me up on Discord, Melderon, #1287, or come find me in the Shaman Discord. Link is in the description. And if you're willing to help test some of these things, I'm more than happy to work with you. So just let me know. We did it. We've gotten through the Advanced Shaman Guide Part 2. Thank you very much for sticking with me thus far. There are a lot of other Shaman resources out there, quality stuff. The Egregious Guide to Resto Shaman is the best guide out there if you want to heal as Resto Shaman endgame. He also has the Restoration Shaman Throughput and Efficiency Calculator and other guides, including the Guide to Wearing Pretty Purples. Check out Orc Bits and Cargos' channels for more Shaman guides, including leveling, pre-raid bis, and a whole bunch of other stuff. I have a lot of Shaman content on my channel. Definitely check out my Shaman Guide playlist. The link will be in the description below. Egregious has also created the Resto Shaman Progressive Best in Slot for pre-raid and all raid tiers. That guide is on ClassicWoW.live. Hamster Wheel also has some excellent Shaman content over on his channel. All these links will be in the description. And finally, come join Egregious and I, Ace, and the rest of the Shaman Discord, where we have a lively community that discusses all things Shaman all the time. The link to the Shaman Discord is in the description below. With that, everyone, thank you so much for watching this guide. If you like this content, please leave a like below. If you want to see more guides and more community pieces that we're working on, drop us a subscribe to be on the lookout for more Defcamp Melderon TV Classic WoW content. We also do 2 different podcasts, Good Morning Azeroth and DefTalk, which are listenable on Google Play, SoundCloud, Stitcher, iTunes, and Spotify. You can join the Defcamp Melderon TV community on Twitter and on Discord, and you can follow Defcamp, my brother, on his streams at twitch.tv/Defcamp or watch him stream on YouTube. The links to all that will be in the description below. And again, this guide, along with many others, is available on ClassicWoW.live, which is a community resource and hub for forums, guides, tools, including our excellent leveling guide created by Navik and Egregious, where you can select your faction, select your race and your class, and select your group composition and get the most accurate, quick, and enjoyable leveling routes for you and your group. It's very easy to use, really highly recommend it. I'm using it to play in Classic, so if you want an excellent guide to use while leveling, check out our guide on ClassicWoW.live. Last but not least, thank you patrons for making videos like this possible, and thank you for supporting the channel. And also thank you for aiding us in creating better content. And thank you stream team, regular contributors to Defcamp stream on Twitch and YouTube. Thank you all so much for your support. Well, that's it. Thank you so much for watching. Keep on keybinding and grinding. Peace, my shaman brothers and sisters. May the ancestors be with you, and I can't wait to see you guys in Classic Azeroth. Take it easy. Greetings, adventurers. Melderon here. Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you'd like to support some official Defcamp Melderon t-shirts and hoodies, head on over to Brandon Media's Defcamp Melderon TV merchandise website. The link is in the description below.